Dawn came grudgingly to the city. A gray seep through the eastern haze, and with it the rookery woke. Wings thudded against rafters. Feathers sifted down. Jon Arryn stood with one hand on the sill and watched the sky bruise itself into day while the ravens muttered in their wicker baskets. The river below the Red Keep was a smear of dull pewter. The smell in the rookery was dung and dust and the faint oil used to soften leather laces. It was the smell of messages, of secrets carried on hollow bones across a restless realm. "Your hands are shaking," Stannis said behind him. Jon flexed his fingers. The stiffness was winter's old gift to his joints, though summer lay heavy outside. These hands have held worse truths. Stannis Baratheon had the aspect of a man carved from ship's timbers, all hard grain and knots, creaking when he moved. He had brought the book himself last night by candle, not trusting a scribe or page. It lay open now upon the table, a swell of faded vellum, the lineages and histories of the great houses. Jon had read it a dozen times in his youth when he still thought the order of the realm a thing that could be learned from a patient text. He had not known then how often men could set the book aflame and pretend the ashes spelled something kinder. "Gold yields," Stannis said, tapping the page as if it were a patient that needed waking. "We have the proofs you demanded. The boy in the armory, the babe at the brothel, the dyed helm that did not hide black hair." His jaw worked. He hated every word because words were not swords. "You must tell him. Today." "I will," Jon said. "I am hand to the king. I was his brother in all but blood before that. I will not have this creep about like rot under floorboards. But it is a hard thing." "It is the right thing," Stannis answered, and there was no comfort in his voice, only a flint edge that had cut ships from storms and men from their excuses. Jon ran a finger along the spines of the listed marriages, the tight script of bastardy and lawful issue. He thought of a stag's head black against pale field, thought of hair like sunlight set upon brows that should have borne a storm's darkness. Truth was rarely elegant. It clomped along in heavy boots. "The boy in the armory," Jon said. "Gendry, was it? I want him brought. And his master. Tobo Mato's crowns enough to speak plain." "I've sent for them," Stannis said. "No one will mistake what they are summoned for." "And the girl, Bara?" Jon's mouth tightened around the name. "The mother will be protected." Stannis's gaze did not shift. "She will while the king dreams. After today, who can say?" Jon closed the book. The rustle startled a raven to flight. It flapped once and came to rest upon a beam, head cocked as if listening. "I will do this with him alone at first. He is not a man to be caged by a crowd. A council is for the proclamation. The first cut is between brothers." "Be swift," Stannis said. "Once this is spoken, it can never be unsaid. Every hour beneath that roof with them is danger." "They are still the mother of his children," Jon said quietly. Stannis's mouth became a line one could have cut cheese against. "They are not his children." Jon let the words settle like dust. He had been foster father to two boys who became men and kings, had kissed both their brows on nights when storms battered the airy windows and they were small enough to be gathered in one arm, had watched them draw swords and grow pride like a second spine. He had told one that law mattered more than love and watched the other become lawless in his loves. He wondered which brother would answer him today. The king was already awake, which meant he had slept poorly. Jon found him in the yard, shirt clinging to a back that once had been iron but now had the slack of soft metal hammered too many times. He grunted with each swing of the warhammer, the head of it a blur that paused only at the moment of impact, punching splinters from the post. Robert Baratheon had been a storm one could love, Jon remembered. A boy with his hair like night and his laughter like thunder driving the fear from kinder men. His breath was sour with the remnants of the night's wine, and yet he smiled with an old warmth when he saw Jon. Then saw Stannis behind him and let the smile freeze like spilled ale. "Two grave faces before the sun is fully up," Robert said. "Has the boar I mean to hunt begun writing petitions?" He thudded the hammer into the dirt and leaned against it. Jon's heart raced a step ahead of his words. "I have asked your brother to stand witness," he said. Because the words are not small. The king's eyes flicked to Stannis and back to Jon. If you've come to tell me what I owe in coin, send for the little bugger with the beard and a ledger instead. I'd sooner be flayed than hear his sums. It is not coin, Jon said. Robert shifted, a weight of attention settling upon him. He could be quick like that still, the old fox behind the antlers. Then be done with it. There is a pattern, Jon said, between fathers and sons, between seed and fruit, maesters and their seeds. The king growled. Speak plain. Jon spoke plain. Later he thought he would not remember his own words as much as he would remember the space between them. The way the yard seemed to lean in, the sound of a raven scolding somewhere, the hammer sinking by inches into the dirt as Robert's hand loosened sweat slick along its haft. Stannis added nothing except the book wordlessly opened in his palm, so that the king could see for himself the stately march of hair and eye from father to son in the line of Baratheon, and first men and lesser houses mixed to their line, and the way all of it seemed to bend toward black as if compelled by a star. Lies, Robert said at last, but his voice lacked fury. Idle ink, bedsheets and books. What do books know of my children? We brought more than ink, Stannis said. The armorers. Boy is within the keep now with his master. He is striking. There is also a girl. He broke off, either out of a thin sympathy or distaste. Robert's hand slid from the hammer and smeared dirt across the one clean patch on his shirt. The edges of his mouth were shaking in a way Jon had not seen since the day Robert had wept for a woman with a name he could no longer bear to say aloud. And you bring this to me now, both of you, together like jailers with a sentence. He reached for anger then, because anger was a weapon he could still swing when all else grew heavy. By all the gods, Jon, you come with him? You, who stood with me when... I come because I love you, Jon said, and Robert flinched as if struck. I come before the realm knows. I come before rumor writes your history for you. I come that you might act as a king, not be acted upon by men less fit for the crown than you. Stannis did not lower his eyes. They are not yours, he said again, like a hammer striking a nail until it took. Robert closed his eyes. When he opened them, the lines at their corners had deepened. Bring the boy, he said. Bring them all, and send for her. Cersei wore green and gold when she came, colors that could have passed for Tyrell to less knowing eyes. The gown fell from her like water. A net of thin gold hung in her hair. Jaime walked 2 steps behind her, helm under one arm. Jaime, whose face had cut queens' hearts when he was a squire. The Kingsguard paces felt measured, but Jon saw how his mouth was set. Myrcella attended her mother, pale and golden, and Tommen came with them, drowsy with being dragged so early from bed. Joffrey did not come. He sent word, or Cersei sent it for him, that the breakfast settled poorly with him. Robert's jaw worked at that. They gathered in the council chamber because it was a room of oak and hard chairs and no bed softness to weaken the spine. Pycelle arrived puffing and echolalic, Renly sleek as a cat, Peter Shuffle smile, Varys careful and soft-footed. Barristan Selmy stood at Robert's shoulder with the gallant exhaustion of a blade with a bright nick where it had saved a man's life. Janos Slint hovered in the doorway with the unctuous importance of a man who thinks every door needs him to stand inside it. I am told. He stank of honest work and cheap soap. When he lifted his face to the light that fell through the shutters, it was like Robert's face had been gathered up and remolded by a hand with the same plan but fresher materials. The line of brow, the set of the mouth. Stannis did not speak. He did not need to. Cersei's gaze went past the boy as if he were a stain on a slab she had ordered cut for wine. You bring us a bastard and a ledger, she said mildly. Shall we call for a bard and be done? My lord husband, if this is a jest, I am too simple to follow it. Robert's laugh was a sound with a splinter in it. You know it's no jest. He stalked closer to the boy, then stopped and held himself as if a hunt had trained him to stillness. What is your name, lad? Gendry, the boy said, and his eyes flicked around the room to all the strange jewels and silk and swords that were not a forge. Robert swallowed. Your mother, was she in the street of silk? She was a tavern girl, the boy answered, slow, suspicious. She's dead. Leave the boy, Cersei said, and there was iron under the silk now. This is beneath us. Robert, beneath us. He turned on her, grasping at fury because otherwise there was air and a long fall. I am a man. You're a king, she snapped. And for a moment in her face Jon saw a hard, narrow thing utterly unlike her brother's or father's. A blade shaped by a different fire. Be one. Stannis's laugh was not a laugh at all. A queen you are not. Jaime's hand shifted on the helmet he carried. His eyes moved like sunlight on a blade's face, catching on the king's hand, on Stannis, on Barristan's posture. Jaime had killed one king once. The story gripped men's tongues like a burr. They could not stop picking at it. He had done it near the end of a different broken reign and had been called dishonorable for having done the one honorable thing he had ever done. Men were rarely thanked for doing what they most should. Robert lifted a hand. All of you shut your mouths. He looked at Gendry again. The boy stared back, unafraid because ignorance can be courage. The king turned to Pycelle. Call the girl. Bara's mother came white-faced and trembling, the child wailing on her shoulder. It had hair as black as night 2 hours after dusk. It had eyes the clear brown of a stag's. No book was needed for that lesson. Renly made a sound of distaste. Peter's lips pursed, calculating sums invisible to others. Varys's gaze was a mask inside a mask. Only his fingers fussed at each other. Cersei did not move. Her stillness was an act more powerful than any cry. Robert breathed once, twice. Jon. A proclamation, Jon said softly. It must be clear and lawful. The realm will be the calmer for it. The realm will never be calm, Renly murmured, but he smiled. Stannis stepped forward like a sword's edge walking. By the laws that have stood since Aegon and before, the succession is set. We will hear our queen, Robert cut across him. Serstibo. Wet her head, and for an instant Jon thought he had misjudged her, that there would be tears. But when she lifted her face there was only ice. Your Grace, she said, voice measured. Every man in this room has made himself my enemy. I wish you joy of their counsel. You are my wife, Robert said. You will remain under my roof. The children will remain. She laughed. It was very much like a bell rung the wrong way. Your children, Your Grace? He flinched again. He could not seem to stop it. They are innocent. Jon spoke because someone must. They are innocent of the making. That does not make them princes. They must be kept safe. You will not keep them, Cersei said to him. You will keep your precious realm and your book of names. We will see whose names are remembered. There are lions in this city and beyond it. She did not look at Jaime when she said the word. Robert turned away as if the sight of her had become a place too bright to endure. Barristan, he said. Have them kept to their chambers, guards at every door. Slint. Janos swelled to attention. Post double watches on the gates and the river. No Lannister goes in or out without my leave. Your Grace, Janos said, already thinking of who to bribe and how much. Stannis drew himself straight. The proclamation. We will do it, Robert rasped. Gods help me, we will do it. He looked at his brother. I named you master of ships once because you knew how to take a storm. I don't love you, Stannis, but by law you are my heir. Don't let it swell your neck. He looked to Renly and almost smiled. And you pretty peacock. Keep your mouth from talking your brother into treason before midday. Would I do that? Renly said, dimples deepening. Every damn day, Robert growled, but the corners of his mouth twitched. He sawed a hand through the air. Go, write your damned words, Jon. And after... His voice broke and recovered. After I want the boy brought to me, not the baby. The boy. I'll see him and speak to him and give him a coin to buy a better master if he wants one. He won't want one. They never do. Cersei watched them file out. Jaime stayed at her shoulder. When the room had thinned, she turned her head very slightly and breathed. Tonight, he knew what she meant. Jaime had seen the tunnels laid by hands long dead beneath this keep, seep-smelling and close, with old dust in the corners and the stones rubbed smooth by shoes that had run for life or for greed. He had been a boy when Ares had made him watch men burn. He had learned too young how quick choices could be. Now he looked at the king's back where sweat made his shirt cling and imagined a hammer swing. "Tonight," Jaime murmured, and did not know if he lied. In the Tower of the Hand, Jon placed his seal to words that would unmake a decade of festivities. The letters grew into lines. The lines became an edict that would jar every table in the realm. He set down the stylus and rubbed his eyes. In his mind he saw a thin boy in his old home, Arryn blood and Stark blood under his roof, Ned and Robert, squire and fostered, laughing on the airy steps. He had thought then all life was the molding of such boys toward a better order. Now he held a different book. He called a page and sent him with the sealed writs to the herald's hall. He sat back. When the page had gone, he poured wine and did not drink it. Peter Baelish slid into the room with the way of a man who could stroll into a wolf pit and begin to calculate the price of their hides. "The small council is abuzz," he said in a half-whisper. "A beehive with a burned stick pushed inside." "Get out," Stannis said immediately. "Lord Stannis?" Peter said sweetly, as if he were offering a sugared fig that had already rotted. "I only came to relieve the hand of certain burdens. Bread for the criers. A weight of coin for Janos's men to shout louder than any rumor. Burden yourself elsewhere," Stannis snapped. Jon did not look up. "I will use any man who will serve the realm today." Peter's mouth quirked. "How noble. It is almost frightening." He cocked his head. "Do you suppose the lion in his rock has heard yet? Ravens are swift. So are rumors." He drew a finger along the edge of the desk. "If I were a father with my legacy declared smoke, I might march." Stannis's jaw bunched. "If he marches, he will march against his king. If he does not march, his daughter will rot in silk with a guard at her door, and her children will grow to be nothing more than the stories she tells." Peter smiled wider, showing his small, neat teeth. "I have known that lady since she was a girl too clever for her own good. She will not rot quietly." Jon lifted his head. "The queen cannot leave the keep." Peter's eyes were green and lazy. "Of course not," he murmured. "Of course she cannot." That night the keep breathed like a sleeping beast. The city below rang with 1,000 voices as criers at every corner bellowed half of Jon's proclamation, and men repeated to each other the other half with 1,000 embellishments. At a gatehouse in the River Row, Janos Slint's men looked the other way for a moment, the length of a coin sliding across a palm. In a corridor that ran beneath the queen's apartments, a rat stirred and froze as lamplight approached. Jaime walked a pace ahead, Sandor Clegane a pace behind, cloak thrown over mail. Cersei's hand closed tight around Myrcella's, and Tommen stumbled on the steps once and blinked tears but did not cry out. Joffrey walked without touching anyone, his mouth a tight line, his chin thrust forward so much that a breath might have snapped his neck. Varys watched them from a niche carved when some old mason had wanted a place to put his tools. The spymaster did not move. He did not breathe. In his mind he turned the pieces and watched them sprawl across the board, black and white. He let them go because he knew the city and its storms. Sometimes a ship should be allowed tea. Oh, flee harbor to founder upon rocks elsewhere. It left harbor space. They were almost to the river when Sandor stiffened. He had a dog's nose and a hound's ears. He raised a hand. The queen hissed and then lowered her head. The king's guard had his hand on his sword and then, like a man remembering too late to be cautious, eased off the hilt and took Cersei's elbow. They waited, listening to water slap pilings. Silence unrolled. Footsteps came from the turn ahead, quick, then slower as the someone spotted light. A boy's voice said, "I told you this was not the way. You're the one who said you knew." An older man hissed. "Shut your mouth." Gendry appeared first, his lamp held high, the tallow going saucy with sputter. Behind him Tobo Mott looked very unlike a master of fine steel, and very like a man who had allowed himself a curiosity too costly by half. The boy peered. "I know you," he said to Cersei. He blinked. "You're..." The hound moved in a flash, one hand clamped over the boy's mouth. Jaime's sword was in the other man's face as quick as thought. Cersei seized the moment and hissed, "Back, back," as if she were a child playing in the tunnels. They edged around, oil light bumping stuttering arcs along wet stones. From the far end came more feet. Janos Slint's men arrived late, sweating, smelling of onions and fear. They were not expecting the Kingsguard, had not been paid to expect him. It is the nature of coin to buy only exactly what it has been counted for. The two parties stood with the river between them, and for an instant something like peace held. Then Joffrey, who could bear nothing that he did not himself decide, snatched the lamp from Jaime's hand. He flung it at the nearest man because he could not hurl himself at fate. Oil streaked a guard's cloak and fire took. Someone screamed, and screaming unloosed the future. Swords shrieked like gulls. The hound tore the boy from his grasp and shoved him behind. Tobo Mott was crying for someone to stop. 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 Cersei pulled her daughter hard enough to leave a bruise that would show for days. Tommen tripped again and fell, and Jaime yanked him up with a gentleness nothing else about him predicted. Joffrey had a dagger and wanted to use it, but there were men in the way who had a larger desire not to die. The tunnel filled with sound. Above, in the king's chambers, Robert paced and wore through soft leather slippers he had not known he owned. Jon sat with a goblet that had not left its place on the table and listened to the silence that follows a man stepping to an abyss and not yet falling. Stannis stood by the window and watched the far pinpoints of the city's torches and thought of Dragonstone, of a fortress built to withstand anything but time. A runner came. He was pale and wheezing and had lost his shoe, which meant he had been bribed by someone to run faster or had been someone's fool. "They've gone," he said. "Who?" Stannis demanded. "The Queen. The children." Robert's hand found the old hammer as if it were a friend. "No," he said. It was not denial. It was a command given to heir. He looked at Jon. For an instant he was not a king but a boy at the Eyrie with dust on his knees and a heart too large for his chest. "They cannot be gone. They cannot be far," Stannis said, already moving. "Close the river. Slint." "Slint," Jon said, and his voice was a blade drawn across velvet. "Yes, Slint." By dawn the city had a story. The Queen had been taken by spirits from the old Targaryen tunnels. The Queen had been smuggled out in a cask of Arbor gold. The Queen had bribed a Septon with a kiss and then slit a guard's throat. The Queen had turned to a white bird and flown. The only piece they could prove was the litter overturned at the mud gate and the guards who smelled of oil and fear and were missing eyebrows. Robert did not hunt that day, though boars gathered in the forest beyond the city as if invited. He assembled his men and gave orders with a steadiness that shamed his own heart. Small folk craned and pointed and widened their stories to fit his rage. By noon ravens had taken to every point on the compass. Casterly Rock, Storm's End, the Eyrie, Winterfell, the Hightower, Sunspear, Dragonstone, Riverrun. They carried Jon's proclamation and lesser letters, some written in a hand that trembled. They carried commands. They carried a father's plea folded around a king's command. At Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister was already awake when the raven came. That was not remarkable. The Warden of the West had the habits of an iron clock wound in his youth that would depart this world with the last chime still echoing. He ate dark bread and cold beef and drank small beer and made plans that became men's fates. The letter soot the fingertips of the man who brought it. Tywin read once with no change in his face. He read again, and the second reading might have been considered rage from a man who had ever admitted to rage. He handed the parchment to Kevin, who had never learned to hide anything in his face. Kevin blanched. "They dare. They dare," Tywin repeated softly. He rose with the quiet of a mountain that had decided to move. "Send word to every bannerman. We ride for the Golden Tooth. We will do nothing quickly and everything thoroughly. Tell them their lord requires them to be exactly as their heraldry claims. No less." "What of the Queen?" Tywin's mouth moved in a way that would have been a smile on another man. "She will be welcomed home." He did not say under what terms he meant home. He did not say anything about grandchildren who were and were not. He did not say the word bastards. He had cut out of himself any part that bled easily when he had been a boy, and his father had laughed when he should have ordered. He had shown the realm once that a weak lord's subjects could be made to sing happily while their bodies hung from castle walls. He would not sing now. He would march. In the vale, Lysa Arryn too. Kay the raven in hands that shook even when she was calm. She read the proclamation, and a wretched, shrill laugh escaped her. "He lives," she whispered, as if Jon's name had been in doubt because he had not been present for 3 suppers. "Peter said the city would kill him. Peter said. Peter says many things," Peter said behind her and smiled. He accepted the parchment as a lover accepts a token, with a bow of the head and a little show of reverence. He read, and the corners of his mouth flickered. She watched his mouth. She always watched his mouth. "He is a bold man, our hand." "He should be here," Lysa gasped. "He should be with his wife and his son." "He has a different child at his breast," Peter said sweetly. "The realm." He touched the parchment. "This is brave. It is also reckless. Now the lions must show their fangs. The stag is still spry, so they will aim lower, perhaps for the boar in the bushes." He looked to the child playing with wooden knights on the rushes. "Sweet Robin, come to your mother." The boy did not come. He held his knight high and made a whinnying noise, and then began to cough. Lysa's face tightened with fury and fear and something else untidy. "Do not call him that in front of others. He is Robert. He is Lord of the Arryn." She snatched him up and rocked him hard enough that a calmer child might have cried. Peter's eyes were coins tumbling one over the other in some private counting house. "And if lions come padding up mountain goat paths?" "They cannot," Lysa said immediately, a child again herself. "They cannot climb. The sky is ours." Peter stroked his little beard. "Indeed it is." He folded the parchment and slipped it into a belt pouch. He had lived his whole life by making himself appear to matter less than his words and coin, and then mattering more. "Write to your sister," he said. "Tell her to hold her husband by the sleeve. Winterfell is far, the north slow to wake, and sometimes we need slow men far from tables where rashness is poured like wine. In Winterfell the ravens came with the noon sun and the clatter of the forge." Maester Luwin read the letters twice, once with his lips, once with his heart. He took them to Lord Eddard Stark and found him leaning over a map of the lands beyond the wall drawn in boys' guessing and old men's tales, a curiosity he indulged at times when his gaze needed cooling. When he lifted his head, the light from the window made his scruff a bright border. His eyes were winter water. "Jon wants me," he said when he had read. "He wants the realm," Catelyn murmured, but her hand touched his for a heartbeat. "You will give him yourself as you always have." There was no reproach in it. There was an old pain, patient as a woman who has borne 5 children. "Will you ask me not to go?" he said softly. "I will ask." She cursed herself for asking, even as she did. "Stay. Leave the South to its fevers. Let Robert cure himself or die of them without you." He looked at her as if she had said her own heart's betrayal aloud. "He is my brother, not by birth, but by what matters more." "Your brother has a brother," she said. "2 of them, and a hand. You have sons. They are safer if I go. Sansa will be safer if the queen does not ride through here on her way to your head." He smiled without pleasure. "Cersei does not ride. Others ride for her." "Then let them ride past you," she said. "We have kept the north safe by staying in it and by not thrusting a hand into southern mouths." He put a hand on the map and smoothed a crease that was not there. "I will send men," he said. "I will send banners enough to make a statement and small enough to be recalled if the statement becomes folly. I will send a lord to command them who knows the rivers and the paths where men vanish. I will not leave you with a war at your door. But I do not think I can ignore Jon. If his letter were a plea, I could refuse it. It is a line drawn. And men step over lines," she said coldly. "Men love to step over lines. Look at you. Look at my father's bones. Lines draw men like a fire draws moths." He kissed her brow, and she let her head drop for a moment to his shoulder in a surrender older than marriage. "I will not be foolish," he said. "I will not be proud. I will. Be yourself," she finished, and could not help the tenderness in it. "That has always been enough." She pulled away. "Bran," she said with a little half-laugh. "Find him. He has climbed where he should not again. If you must go, at least say farewell where even the ravens cannot reach." Bran had climbed the old broken tower and now lay along its top like a small brown cloak, eyes closed, listening to the wind. He had a game. He counted how long he could keep his eyes closed and still know the yards and corners and chimneys of his home by smell and sound alone. He thought the wind spoke in the gummy voice of old men telling a story too long. He did not look when he heard the scrape of a boot on daggered stone, because he always knew who had come by the way their steps argued with the wall. His father touched his ankle and said, "Come down." Bran grinned. "Why, I am a bird." "Then fly," Ned said, and held out his arms, and Bran had the sense to laugh and climb down with care. When he jumped the last drop, his father caught him and huffed. Bran wrapped his arms around the thick neck and pressed his face to the smell of leather and smoke and something he thought might be trees. He did not ask where his father was going. He could smell it in the way Ned held him and looked past him, sometimes into a distance no one else could see. Bran was a boy and thought distances a thing you overcame by climbing them. He did not think of lines at all. That evening, in a hall thick with the smoke of candles and stew and comfortable talk, Robb stood with Theon and watched the map. Theon's grin was as sharkish as always. He had a tankard that he sloshed extravagantly when he spoke and narrowly, kept from spilling because men like Theon were born with invisible balancing poles others could not see, inherited from luck or the sea. "If the king calls banners," Theon said, "we go." Simple as pissing. Robb's jaw shifted the way his father's did before a decision. "Not simple," he said, "but we go. A chance to show you can swing a sword without anyone holding your hand on the hilt," Theon said, amused. "I had you for that," Robb said dryly. Theon barked a laugh. "Your lady mother will chain you in the godswood." Robb glanced toward the far end of the hall where Catelyn sat with Sansa and the younger boys, and a muscle in his cheek twitched. "She will ask me to stay. And you will go anyway." Robb's eyes were clear. "I will go anyway." He paused. "I will ask for your bow. You can have it when you rip my hand off," Theon said lightly, and clapped him hard on the shoulder, and then clapped him again softer as if to steady something. "We'll ride." In the city, the day after the queen fled, the criers were hoarse and the brothels busy, and fear turned into tricks and traps. Fishmongers sold eels smarter than most of their customers and talked of kings. In the Street of Steel, Tobomot closed his shop with a board across the door and then sat behind it like a man facing a siege. Gendry did not come that morning. He was at the Grand September with the king's coin in his pocket and a strange thought in his heart, that a king might put copper in his hand because of his face. Once the proclamation was read from the September steps, twice, thrice, louder and louder until the words became sound and the sound became anger, the small folk began to change the words. By afternoon the truth had acquired horns and hooves and a tendency to gore anyone who came near. The city watched to see who would bleed first. In Flea Bottom men threw bones and asked if they were the kings. In the Red Keep Barristan posted his best at the postern gate and did not trust Janos Slint's men beyond what he could kick them. Robert drank because he had always drunk when hurt, because men built their own cages. Jon did not speak to him of it. He spoke instead of riders riding out on every road and ships under Stannis's order ready to scour the river for any craft to the west. Renly came with a smile and left with a frown. Peter came with a purse and left with a promise he had already broken. Varys came with whispers and left with silence. "Tywin will not write," Varys said at last on the third day. "He will ride." "Let him," Robert said. "I've beaten a dragon prince at the Trident. I can beat a snake at a rotten bridge." He rubbed his face. "We will need the reach." Renly's face brightened at that like dawn finding a field. "Then I propose a marriage." Robert blinked. "Another one? Gods have mercy." "On the realm," Renly said. and with a single gesture of his hand he sketched a crown upon the air. House Tyrell holds nearly half the grain in the south. They feed or starve men at a whim. They will back the king who gives them a queen's chair. Marjorie is a rose that does not wilt in heat. Does she sing? Robert asked hollowly. Like a lark, Renly lied without missing a breath. Jon looked at him, thinking of a girl he had never seen, of a mother he had seen too often. The realm needs peace, he said. If a marriage brings the Tyrells to one table, we can feed both men and horses. Your Grace. Robert slumped in his chair. You picked them for me now, Jon? You always did in the end. He poured wine with a hand more careful than it used to be. Send your word to their lord. He looked at Stannis. Do not scowl so hard. If I make a new queen, the old one will try to drown us all in wine if not blood. We must fetch her before her father puts a fortress around her. We march in a week. Stannis nodded. The fleet will be ready. He hesitated, then added, the law is clear. Before you marry again, the marriage must be ended. Robert drank. He did not flinch. I will not let them burn her. I am tired of burned women. There are other ways, Jon said. There is nullity. There is shame, Robert said, and his eyes were suddenly very old. There is always shame where there should have been love. He set the cup down. Write what you must. If the September must be appeased, appease it. If the realm must be placated, placate it. His wrist trembled. I will do what kings do. I will ride at the head of men and be useful where I know how. In the black vault of Dragonstone the tide hissed like a serpent. Stannis stood upon the battlement and felt the wind push him as if to test how far a man might lean before breaking. He had grown up here in stone fashioned like dragons that never drew breath, in the salt smell of storm-birthed nights. He had learned to read here and to hate the gratitude of men who came to borrow. He sent letters to his captains and to Salladhor Saan, pirate and friend, and he tightened every knot that could be tightened before he left the island to its talking stones and servants who knew how to wait. Salladhor came because coins smelled the same on any table. He came with stories of a girl across the sea with silver hair and a belly round with a caul seed. The winds change, the Lysine said with his flashing grin. If I sail long enough, I can catch the same wind twice and take the same coin from a different pocket. Do not tell me of silver-haired girls, Stannis said. I do not have room in my head for one more false king or broken oath. Then I will bring you a true wind, Salladhor replied, and counted his share a second time when Stannis looked away. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen lay beneath the woven roof of a Khale's tent and felt her son turn against her hand. She was hot and peaceful and wondered at peace, how one could find it lying on sand among men who thought peace a tent between raids. She had not been hunted by wine merchants yet, and did not know the taste of poiso. Ned fruit. Jorah Mormont brought her a fish cooked in leaves and told her a story of a northern island where bears walked the beaches. She laughed and put her hand to her belly, and her hair gleamed like dull metal in morning light. She did not yet know that dragons sleep in stones because in this world men insisted on putting them there. In the Riverlands, the men of House Tully tried not to choose sides while messengers galloped and the camps along the Red Fork swelled. Edmure fretted and practiced speeches in a looking glass. Hoster Tully coughed and thought of old banners he had asked to fly and old bannermen he had persuaded with soft words that cost him teeth. He wrote to his daughter in Winterfell and told her he would be proud of any choice she made as long as it was his. The west stirred. Armies gather sound like an ox at plow, slow, inevitable. Jaime rode with a vanguard to secure a passage at the Golden Tooth and found it already held by men who widened their eyes at a white cloak. He did not say he wanted to be elsewhere. He watched boys grow into men when they buckled swords wrongly and wished suddenly to teach a son to hold a blade. Instead he taught other men, and they watched him with a careful kind of awe because he had once stuck a sword in a man most people had been taught to name sacred. He did not know how to be less than the story men told about him, so he was exactly that. The day the royal host marched, the city turned itself out as if for a feast. It always did for marching hosts. There was spectacle and theft, and women who had already taken the coins of those who would not return and then were paid twice by those who would. Robert rode at the front with the hammer across his saddle and Barristan to his right and Stannis at his left with the grim set mouth that looked less like anger and more like prayer when seen sideways. Renly rode behind with 10 knights whose armor shone too brightly. Peter did not ride. Varys did not. Jon Arryn rode at the king's side, his joints aching, thinking of the Eyrie and how air that high was too thin to carry the stink of fear. The banners lifted a river of color that would have seduced any painter to blow his bloody brains on the flagstones. The stag of Baratheon nodded at the antlers of lesser vassals. The crown of the capital men marched as if they expected to turn around and march back for lunch. The Stormlands came up sturdy and weather-proud. The smaller bands of reachmen riding to meet were already flamboyant, as if a battle could be won by the air a plume took. The first skirmishes were ugly and small, and men died for not much. Tywin's men had broken bridges across lesser streams and made certain mills burn to sour bread. Robert swore daily as he ate oats that had a bitter aftertaste. The fields around the Golden Tooth went bare of anything taller than a saddle. The sky grew hot and then broke open, rain drumming upon helms and turning the riverbanks to suck and slick. Men cursed the mud and then fell in it and swallowed it and learned that the world does not care if you are a lord or a commoner when your mouth fills with earth. On the third week, scouts brought word of a Lannister force in the Vale of Ashmark. It was small enough to tempt, large enough to sting. Robert listened to 3 opinions in 3 minutes and then overruled them to make a 4th. "We take them," he said. "We take them hard and fast. We take them as if the battlefield were a girl and we had not drunk." Stannis disliked the metaphor but liked the plan. Jon disliked both and said nothing because he had learned that too many words in the mouth of a king in a saddle made all of them choke. He watched the men knot up, spread, knot up again, the lines at once beautiful and terrifying, like weaving done with blood. They came down a slope through scrub that grabbed at shins. The sky had one cloud, as if someone had forgotten to clear away the last of a feast. Jaime saw them first because Jaime always looked for the best fight and wheeled with a joy that made him look young. He drew his men into a wedge and came on like the point of a story that had been waiting pages for this sentence. Barristan met him with a shock that rang both men from heel to helm. It was like 2 church bells striking one another and making a third note neither had meant to make. Robert crashed left and hammered a knight whose antlers were false. He roared. Stannis's command was a hoarse bellow shaped like order. Renly was very beautiful as he raised his sword and a little clumsy as he brought it down. But the man he struck was more so and had his attention fixed on a different plume. Jon did not draw his sword. He watched. It was not cowardice. It was a man using his age correctly. He saw the line kink when the left wing overreached and he sent a rider with 4 words. He saw the right sag where a hedge grew where scouts had sworn there was none, and he sent an old man with a torch to burn it. It cost 5 minutes and 6 men and saved 50 and an hour later. He watched as Jaime tilted his men toward a place where Stannis' horse had slid and Stannis himself had gone to knee, and he started to move and was beaten there by a white-haired man whose sword was the answer to a question asked decades earlier. The fight closed and opened like a torn lung. It was there that Robert found himself at last with a face to put a name on. The man was broad and had a beard grown to imitate a lordly sneer. He bawled something about bastards. Robert grinned like a skull and hammered him clean from his saddle. Blood took the face and then the life. Robert almost laughed. The fight was a place where he remembered himself. It had rules he understood. He was never more a king than when he had no crown on his head and mud on his calves. When it ended, the valley held a silence like a held breath. Crows in the hedges muttered hungrily. Jaime had not been taken. He had broken away with a neatness that made lesser men swear and admire. He had cut 3 men who would have otherwise lived to old age at a hearth. He had shamed a boy who had been told he was brave and proved it, but not with enough skill. He had not killed Barristan. He had not even tried. Robert stood with his hammer head down and looked at the torn men underfoot and then at the banners that lifted their tired heads. He breathed a prayer that the gods might have once thought to listen to. "We go on," he said. We find Tywin and we end it. Jon felt the tremor move across the men at that. Ending things is what kings promise. The realm has been built of such promises breaking. He closed his eyes a moment. He had lived long enough to know that ending one thing is the same as beginning three, and that is if every man behaves nobly. They did not, as a rule. The march tightened. The ravens flew in wake and ahead. Messages crossed the sky like fish below a prow, flashing and vanishing. Riverrun declared itself for the king with a flourish that cost it grain. The Tyrells answered with 1,000 flowers tied to letters that said nothing until the king agreed and then said everything. A Septon in the city cried doom and was laughed at until he fell dead in the street with his throat cut for failing to make the doom arrive. The Hound chased men who had spoken Joffrey's name and turned from the chase when he remembered he was in the wrong camp. Gendry hammered a piece of steel until it became a shape he had seen on a king's saddle and could not name. Bara's mother sang under her breath to keep her baby asleep and cried quietly when the child slept in spite of the world. At night, Jon walked through the camp, an old man among tents, and listened. He did not pretend that fear made men worse. It made some of them braver. It made most of them meaner. In a furl of shadow, he heard a boy telling another boy that he would be the first to take a Lannister ear. He wanted to say to both of them that ears are for listening and you need them both if you want to live long. But instead he let them boast, because he remembered memory's own drafts made men's cups heavier than any wine. He stopped before the king's tent and listened to the silence inside. He did not enter. There are some kinds of ache one must do by oneself. The letter from Winterfell reached him on the next morning, a little wrinkled from the nest of the raven, the seal firm. Ned's hand was plain as the man. He would come if the king commanded and send men in any case. Jon read it twice, felt a warmth, and folded it. He thought of two boys at the Eyrie again and wondered if any of your life truly left you or if it simply put on new clothes and walked a little irregularly. They met a stronger host upon the Red Fork's eastern branch, where the water ran green-brown and fat. Tywin was not there. He had sent a man he could spare and could afford to lose and whose death would make his bannermen's fear settle into obedience like snow upon a bank. Robert cursed when he realized and cursed again when he learned Tywin had crossed to the south with another, larger wedge, moving on Riverrun. The old lion had not meant to fight on ground the king chose. He meant to pull the fight across river and field until Robert sweat away his rage and dried up on calculation like a puddle left in sun. Then he meant to strike. "Of course," Jon murmured. "He will not meet you where you are strongest." Robert wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Then we move where he is weakest." He looked to Stannis. "Ships. We do not ferry armies like grain," Stannis said. "Even with every boat on the Trident, we move by days." He looked south where the banners would be. "He will strike the fish if he can. Hoster's age will be a lure. The boy is brave and not bright enough to be patient. Edmure will meet him in the field even if his father dies ordering him to wait." Renly brightened. "We can make haste and break his back," he said. Jon shook his head. "We can make haste and break our own neck." He leaned upon a staff and ignored the way it made his pride bend. "We split, a force to harry him, to keep him honest, and another to take the tooth he needs." "Do not split your strength," Stannis said. His mouth twisted. "Do not listen to men who have never held a wall in winter and do not know that walls are held by weight." "We cannot reach two places at once," Jon said. "We must be two places." He spoke low, aware of the turning of their faces toward him in a way that had nothing to do with the title he bore. "Your Grace, give me men and I will slow him, bite at his heel. Take the main host and show yourself at the river crossing that matters. Loyal men will gather quicker to a king than to an old man with bad knees." Robert's laugh was sudden and real. "Your knees have never been clever," he said. "Your wits have always been. Done. Stannis, you have the vanguard. Renly, do not die while trying to look handsome. Barristan, keep them from being stupid." "And you?" Stannis asked. Robert's eyes glinted. "I am the hammer. Someone must swing." Jon rode light, with a picked band of men whose horses did not stumble and whose captains read orders more than once. They fell upon supply trains and left casks of wine brimming in ditches and men disgusted with thirst to watch it seep. They lit fires when men were trying to sleep and then put them out so the smoke turned in circles and crept into throats. They moved faster than fear could follow, which is the only way to move and still reach morning. He did not pretend to himself this was gallant. He had done gallant when he was young and thought it better than smart. He was not ashamed to be smart. He watched the Lannister columns ripple like a snake trying to swallow more than its belly could hold. He thought, Tywin, you taught yourself too much about the pride of men who stand still. Meet a man who moves. When they came at last into sight of the confluence where the rivers kissed, banners blew like washed clothes and men shouted for lords and gods and their mothers. The battle began with horns and then lost them. The storm made by men's yelling blurred all other sound. Robert went forward like a man who had kept a promise to himself. Jaime was not there. He was elsewhere, making someone brave. Tywin had held himself back a little way from the foremost line, an economy rather than a cowardice. He watched the ragged split in the king's company and bared his teeth, a private motion. He had meant to lure and he had. He signaled. His flank moved like a door closing. And then a horn blew thin and far to the north. Another. Tywin squinted and did not like the shape of the banners coming down that ridge. The trout and the direwolf ran together like water and fur. He had not expected that yet. Robb Stark rode as if the horse were an extension of his stubborn first stride as a toddler. His eyes were wide and his mouth tight. He could not be 20. His men came hot and quick behind him, the Great John roaring like two men, Ser Roderick Castle a steady bar of iron, Theon Greyjoy grinning like the sea. They hit the Lannister flank with a timing that would be called genius by men who had not seen how chance and stubbornness and a father's letter had taught a boy his hour. Tywin's mouth became very still. He signaled again. That is all he did when plans altered. He did not swear. He did not cry. He moved his men like a river around a stone and was too slow by an instant that would breed poems for 2 winters and forgetfulness after. Jon watched sunlight glance off the king's hammer like someone blessing a weapon and felt such a flood of gratitude and grief that he almost laughed. He thought of the boy in the armory and the girl in the brothel and the woman in green and gold and of his own Alice flying across the snow on a palfrey all those years ago. Her hair a pennon, before it had turned gray and thin and she had died with his name inside her breath. He wondered if any of this would lead to peace. He suspected it would not. He wanted it anyway with the desperation of a dying man wanting one more winter to watch and curse. Robert met a lord with too much horse and too much pride and struck him. The man fell and where he fell opened a little, and into that opening poured the men behind him, and the opening became a cleft and the cleft was a wound. Barristan drove the point. Stannis held the line and took 2 blows upon shield and returned one that made other men watch him as if he were any other. Renly did not die. Robb laughed once. A raw young sound quickly embarrassed by itself. When it ended the river ran red in tired cliches and men sat down very suddenly and did not stand again. Tywin was gone, riding with a discipline that makes defeat like a closed fist rather than a smashed one. He would not break. He would retreat and measure and come again, or he would wait until hunger came to fight for him. He had not lost the way some men lose, with their eyes gone blank and their mouths open. He had lost like accounting. He would balance later. Jaime the morning after fought his own fight, striking the men who had cut him off from news and then slipping away with 2 companions through orchards that would be remembered as a place where apples fell red from branches that autumn as if the trees were outdoing men for show. He did not think of Cersei the way he had as a boy. He thought of her as a problem to solve. He thought of his oath and wanted to spit. He thought of a boy in an armory and hated him for being innocent of anything but being himself. Robb Stark rode to the king's tent at dusk, mud to his thighs and adrenaline still making his hands shake in the moment he took to tie the horse. He walked in without being announced and stopped when he saw Robert with his head in his hands and Jon Arryn standing near the entrance as if he were a winter wind that had slipped in and refused to leave. Robb bowed awkwardly and then did it properly. "Your Grace," he said, and blushed because the king's eyes were on him and those eyes had once stared down dragons. Robert stood. He was filthy and grand. He reached and hauled the boy close with one hand and clapped him so hard on the shoulder that Robb flinched and smiled all at once. "You came like a hell," Robert said. "Where's your father?" "He rides to close a pocket you left," Robb said, and then stared at Jon. "My lord hand." Jon inclined his head. "You ride well. Your father wrote that you would." Robb swallowed. Compliments were harder than orders. "I only did what the land allowed." "Only is how men live," Robert said. He poured wine and did not hand it to Robb. "You will have water. You are a boy." He handed him water himself, and it was more honor than any goblet could hold. "We will need you again." Robb drank like a man who had never drunk water with a king. "I," he said, and hoped he would not disgrace himself the next time. That night Jon walked alone once more. He went farther than prudence because prudence grows heavy when a man has carried it 3 decades. He found a low place between 2 oaks where the sound of the river was like a woman arguing with a man she loved. He sat and let his knees complain. When the messenger came breathless, Jon smelled fear before he heard words. "What is it?" he asked gently, because men remember gentleness when they remember any man. "The queen," the boy blurted. "She is with her father. They say she travels the rock like a queen and speaks like a king. They say she calls the king a usurper to his face." He gulped. "They say she will be tried." Jon closed his eyes. He saw a young girl being told she was a pawn and choosing to be a knife instead. He saw a middle-aged woman choosing to be a knife with a different grip, a blade sharpened on spite. He saw a man who had loved both a woman and a crown and had neither last him as he wanted. He felt very old. "Who says?" he asked at last. The boy blinked. "Everyone." Jon smiled despite himself. "Well, that is as good a source as any we can afford." He patted the boy's arm. "Get sleep. You will carry more news tomorrow, and then the next day and the next until the world tires of our little storm and raises a greater one." The boy looked at him as if he were magic and then remembered he was old. He went. Jon looked at the river and tried to read the future written upon it. He saw only currents and the way moonlight makes water into a lie. He thought of the next letters he would write. He thought of Robert and of law and of love, and of hair like gold and hair like night, and of a hammer swinging, and he could not help it. He laughed very softly, and then stopped and listened to make sure he had not woken anything. Far to the east, across a whole sea and more, Daenerys woke to the sound of horses stamping. Her son turned within her as if trying to listen. She smiled and whispered a word she had learned from a language born in grass, and the tent smelled of warm milk and leather and dust. She would not know for a long time the sound of a raven's wing. She would know the sounds of other wings first. In the Red Keep, Gendry hammered a piece of iron into a shape no master had ordered, a thing like a stag's antler twisted into a hook. He did not know why he made it. He only knew that sometimes a piece of metal wanted to be a thing and his job was to let it. He wiped his face and left a clean streak. He did not think of kings when he worked. He thought of the way sparks fly. Catelyn walked in the godswood and laid her hand against a face carved in a tree by men older than her grandfather's grandfather. She did not pray for victory. She prayed for the safety of those she had sent and those she had tried to keep. Her prayers were as selfish as any woman's and as wide as any mother's. She did not think the gods listened closely, but she had found over time that speaking the words out loud calmed a part of her that could not be soothed by maps. The city slept and woke and slept. The realm turned. The storm gathered itself against rock and grass and bone. Jon Arryn woke in the middle of the night with the clear sense of something slipping and almost reached to catch it. He remembered he was old and sat instead. He poured water. He drank. He told himself he had done right and knew that right things do not always have right outcomes. At dawn, the crows bloated on the fields where men had been. Tywin's ravens flew leaner and quicker because they had been trained in lean times. Robert rose and put on mud again and lifted the hammer and told his joints to stop complaining. Stannis counted ships until numbers stopped being comfort and became teeth. Renly wrote letters to a girl in the south he had not met. Varys smiled and said nothing to anyone. Peter kissed a ring on a passing lady's finger and added the taste of gold to his tongue. Jaime laughed with a man who had just almost died and wondered whether anything he did would ever be noble again. Cersei stood upon a high balcony of the rock and let the wind tangle her net of hair and promised herself she would not be dragged by any man's writ to kneel and confess. Ned Stark saddled his horse and looked once more at the faces he loved and rode away like a man who knows the price of leaving and pays it with his spine upright. And above them all the ravens scrawled their black script on the sky, and no one yet had learned to read it. The world held itself poised between breath and blow. The Lannister secret was on every tongue and inside every silence. A taste of iron that would not leave, and the realm ground its teeth around it and made ready to swallow or choke.